if you show up for a meeting unprepared, you're waving a flag that, hey, I'm not on the team. You're waving at least your B player flag to say, look at me, I'm over here wearing the B player uniform. And C, you're signaling to everybody in the room that we're going to have a meeting so we can have another meeting.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to our podcast where we usually work with playing cards, just like, oh, there they are, right here. And we often just pick one at random, unless we have a guest like today, because it would be unfair to the guest to pull out a card and just expect them to catch up immediately, because that's what it is. Today we are incredibly lucky and happy to have with us Damien Burn, and let me tell a story why that came out, because none of this would have happened without this gentleman. When I was a CEO without a coach, at one point I became a CEO with a coach, and that coach was Damien. That what made me realize how much difference a good coach can make in a CEO's life, and that's what eventually led me to a coaching career and writing these cards and having this podcast. So again, we wouldn't be here without Damien, and I believe that Jet, you and Damien go back quite some time as well, correct?
10 years this year, I think maybe even more than 10 years. So yeah, a long time.
Wow.
Yeah. We did our initial training as coaches together in Atlanta in Georgia, which was a lot of fun.
Damien, anything to add to your own introduction?
No, it's been a good journey. I have a lot of credit to share with you both for it being this good. In particular, have a lot of credit to share for Jed kicking my butt and beginning a peer coaching arrangement, which he knows I didn't even know what that was, and we've been meeting every week for now about 10 years.
And peer coaching is all about accountability. It's about two people holding each other to account as peers, which is what's quite special about a whole peer coaching arrangement. So yeah, I've got a huge amount of value from Damien. It's one of those symbiotic relationships where we both feel we get more value than the other. So if you haven't got a peer coach, you should go get a peer coach.
Very much agreed. I quoted Damien in the card of meeting prep because he taught me one thing. He said it several times and it always stuck with me. And the saying was, hey, I didn't have a time to prepare for a short meeting, so we're going to have a long one. I cannot really count on how many times I've actually used it myself ever since, but you're the one I heard it from first. And it's all about accountability, right? Showing up and being prepared means that you're respectful of everybody else's time and everybody else's effort. So good kickoff there. Where did you hear that first, or are you an author of that?
I'm not. And I'm going to surmise with some, maybe an educated guess, that it came from a foreword. I really wish I could tell you who wrote the foreword, but I can't. But it was the foreword to a book, I think, that Peter Drucker wrote, kind of the godfather of management. And I think he gets lots of kudos for the books that he wrote. But that, I guess, kind of like you, Milan, it stood out in my head as, if you truly want to respect your peers, show up ready with the information that is pertinent to the engagement of the people that are in the room. And you know what I really like, I guess, the most about that? Not a lot of A players that show up unprepared for a meeting. Good telltale sign.
Yeah, I could have used that quote yesterday. I mean, I've never heard that quote before, and when I was looking at the meeting prep, I thought, okay, that's gold. I will use that, and I could certainly use it yesterday. Leadership team turned up unprepared, and the meeting just went off the rails really, really quickly because they hadn't done their prep. They just weren't prepared to run the meeting the way it should have done. So we probably got 1/10 of the value out of that session than we should have done, which is a real issue. And this is all about respect, isn't it? If you're late to a meeting, you're being disrespectful. If you're turning up to a meeting and you haven't done your prep, it's about disrespect. And that's in my mind, that's pretty much the inverse of accountability. Being disrespectful is the inverse of accountability.
The other place where this came up a lot is, a couple of weeks ago we recorded the episode on metric ownership. And Jed, when you were just talking, just reminded me of a situation when somebody shows up to a meeting and they're presenting their metric. And that moment in that meeting is the first time that day or maybe that week they actually see the value themselves. So when somebody's asking them, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Oh, I have to go to my team and figure this out, right? It's, again, another sign of lack of accountability. I am sure that between the two of you and the combined decades of coaching history, you have a lot of examples of how accountability shows up, or how do you see when it's missing? There will be some funny stories there, right?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And Damien, I'm sure you'll jump in, but I want to make sure that we cover the topic of accountability ownership, because now that to me is something that people get wrong, and there's no simple one clear answer. Now there is a series of ifs in that combination. But Damien, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, a couple of things. First, if you show up for a meeting unprepared, you're waving a flag that, hey, I'm not on the team. You're waving at least your B player flag to say, look at me, I'm over here wearing the B player uniform. And C, you're signaling to everybody in the room that we're going to have a meeting so we can have another meeting.
Yeah.
Because you simply didn't arrive with the necessary information. And that prep is twofold. One, you prep as long as in advance as you possibly can, because the best people will re-prep. They'll open the meeting up after they know that within their rhythm of how a meeting gets done, that they'll know the timing where they can open up the meeting again, go over everybody else's prep and go, oh, look at that. Jed is looking for an item or an article that I have, and I can get it, rather than waiting another week when Jed says in the meeting, hey, we could use that article to go over that data, and I can go get it and we can solve the problem, a week, a day, a month in advance. It's so cyclical. And in metronomics, it's a rhythm. Preparing for a meeting is also a rhythm. The meeting sets the beat, but you must get ready for it in a cyclical fashion.
Yeah. I think that's probably when you start to see team cohesion kick in. It's when people are actually turning up at meetings prepared, and there's almost like a pre-meeting to the meeting that might be just done between individuals. I notice that you've got a stuck here that is, I can probably unblock that for you. Or to your example, there is an article that someone's looking for, I've got that. Let me just email it to you. That's when they start working together as a team and supporting each other, which is a big part of team cohesion, because the trust is already there. They're not trying to do power moves about, he's got a blocker and I'm not going to help him. It's like they're actually trying to unblock things proactively, rather than just sort of not being on the front foot to help resolve issues like that. So that to me is the start of team cohesion. When you see that, the team's coming together.
I guess, Jed, further to your point, on accountability, we'll probably cover this a little later on, but there's a good segue here where it should not be the leader of the company or the chair of the meeting calling somebody out. We are building a circle of accountability, and you can't make that circle will break if somebody's in the circle who's untrustworthy. And so if they are there and they're untrustworthy, they just made a mistake, it's so without emotion that somebody would go, hey, look, Jed, you just weren't ready for this meeting, and we do expect more of you. And you might give me a reason or an excuse. They're different. And hey, look, good reason. Why don't you just reach out to me next time and I'll help you?
Yep.
Simple as that.
Now let's dig into that. Reason or excuse, they're different. What's the difference?
Well, a reason is usually presented at the beginning of the meeting prior to somebody asking, and it's real. They go, look, guys, I know our team behavior is always to prep for meetings. Let me, beg your forgiveness right away because my house burnt down last night. That's a reason. My dog ate my homework is an excuse. And it normally comes right after somebody says, hey, Jed, why weren't you ready for this meeting?
Yeah.
And you blurt something out and everybody knows you're blurting something out that is just not a reason, it's an excuse.
Yeah, so accountability in that context is proactive. You're actually putting it out there in advance. Yeah. You're not asking for a, apology. You're not apologizing. You're just saying, here is what it is. Here is how it is.
Yeah,
I
I
own
would
it.
equate. Yeah, I would equate that to you know, something as simple as asking for help. You put it out there prior to somebody going, "Hey, you were supposed to be done with that by now."
Mm.
When I know the deadline's coming up and I'm a good team player, and I start to see that I might not make the deadline on something I committed to, if I am a trustworthy teammate and the teammates around me are also trustworthy and we're sharing in that trust, I have no problem going, "Hey, Jed, I'm running behind. Do you have some time to spare? You're an expert here."
And that's the peer accountability thing, isn't it? Not necessarily feeling okay to ask for help, but it being the accepted way to actually offer help in advance. I
Yeah,
can see you struggling there.
imagine the norm is we always get everything done versus, and this happens to us with clients all the time, versus, wow, we sure bit off more than we could chew that quarter. Right. And when you're coaching new clients, they always think they fail to account that, there's only 5 days in the week. There is the whirlwind taking up the majority of your time. You do have your real job, and you forget to account for how much time is actually in the day. After they get good at it and they have some team trust, it's no problem for any of us to sit in a quarterly meeting and somebody say, "You seem to be taking on a lot there. You
Yeah.
know,
Mm.
maybe back off and we'll get done." Like, a priority is something that has to get done, not a nice to have.
Yeah, I had exactly that quote yesterday, and I was questioning whether they'd taken on too much. And exactly that situation, and someone turned around and said, "Well, we just have to do that." And I said, "Having to do something doesn't mean you will do it." Yep. So let's be super, super selective about what we're going to focus on this quarter, because we're a month into the quarter. Now, I'm looking at the colors here, and we've got bright reds and ambers and very little green. It's not going to happen. Oh, but we have to. Having to doesn't make it happen.
Well, then the follow-up question is, what are you going to do differently for the rest of the quarter, right? What is it? What are you going to do with that? And I like the idea of talking about it in advance because stuff happens, we make mistakes, but the accountability is about owning it, right? Not waiting whether somebody notices whether that happens, but to be upfront with it and say, yeah, this is what happened, and I'll do better next time, right? Or whatever, whatever the situation is. And I just love the meeting prep as the signal because I haven't really thought about it. That really, by the way people show up in a meeting, you can get such a good sense of what you're dealing with here as a coach. Never thought about the meeting prep as a sign of a player. I think I need to go back to the card and actually add it to that because that's gold, right? Because they will do that automatically. You know how they show up, how annoyed they get with when somebody else doesn't, right? That's another good signal. It's like, hey, you're wasting my time because they want to use their time for something that is valuable. So thank you for that bit. That's a really good one. I have to noodle on that a little bit.
Further to, I guess, identifying who's on the team and who's not on the team. And I stole this from a very good client, and maybe massaged the question a little bit, but I would give that client credit for this, and he knows who he is. The daily huddle. The first question in all of my daily huddles with the clients is your dashboard up to date with all metrics and priorities being accurate? And it's a yes or a no question to each participant. So I love it when somebody shows up and it goes yes, 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 and then a no, and then a no answer. Especially the no. "I just don't have time for you people." That's all they're saying.
Yeah, I
I'm
am
gonna
not in
work
this
over here.
team.
Can you imagine? I just don't have time to talk to you two. Thanks for coming out, but I'm just gonna sit through this meeting and be on my phone the whole time, and you guys talk about whatever you want to talk about.
And that's really a sign of of someone who is is clearly not part of the team, and it's going to, as you mentioned earlier, that you're having a meeting so that you can have another meeting, because at some point they're going to have to come back and address those points. So yeah, you're having a meeting to have another meeting, and most people hate meetings, so why have more than you need to?
Yeah, most people do hate meetings. They're probably not having good meetings.
That's right. Yeah. They're not the A players that are sort of ready to go. They're there on time, they're prepared, they're ready, and they're going to engage in robust conversation to thrash out the details. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a new client who's been through 2 exits already, and his quote yesterday was, "I just can't understand how I accomplished what I accomplished without having a daily huddle and this meeting rhythm. I would have been so much faster."
You're
So
forgetting about what a meeting does for a C player, right? I don't know if you heard the saying, but having a meeting is the easiest way of avoiding work.
Yeah.
mhm. So earlier on, I sort of posed a question I thought we'd come back to around, accountability ownership, particularly around metrics. So there's a lot of confusion, different views around this. Is it the person who counts it? Is the person who does it? Is it the person who affects it? Do you have a particular perspective? Because I know that you're very, very straight about your definitions, and I think hearing how you define them would be very useful.
Well, I'm going to steal again. I don't think it's a delegation task. Um, because if you're being delegated to, you're being told to.
Yep.
I like it when we have some key metrics in the company, as you know, whatever your company does, you're going to count some things, and those are going to be key company metrics. I wait for somebody to go, "I'll take that." And if we have an argument about it, I'd let them make their case. Um, one of the my most favorite stories is from another coach, now coach who I was coaching, but she became a coach, and her CFO is, "How could I possibly be accountable for cash?" He didn't want it. Well, somebody's going to have to be accountable for cash, and he was. I really just have a couple of levers. I can't really control how much cash is coming in, and um, it was interesting to explain. So he didn't want it. And after I explained to him that he has the best perspective on cash as a financial mind and really can look at the bank accounts every day and report back, and that when you apply that to the KFFM, he can give marketing and sales and production days and days of warning when his cash conversion cycle goes off, that somebody else is actually red. It's not cash. He can see the trend to red. So I think to take that full scale, I think first and foremost, it's somebody who absolutely wants that metric. If somebody doesn't want the metric, I think it's up to the team or the coach or the head of company to make that something that they find reasonably attractive, to measure their position, and they are obsessed with updating it, good or bad, particularly good. You go, "Look, I scored," and they update their metric. When you know somebody wants to update their metric, you have got them to the right place, because they're literally showing the team that they're a great contributor. And I think that's the way to get there. If somebody's updating a metric they hate that is useless, that is a negative exercise in their behavior. It's an exercise in futility, actually. Um, find the right ones, find the people who want them. And sometimes I say to people, "Look, I can take that metric if you want, because I love that metric and I'm going to update it every day." And if you can get that with people, I think you've come across the right set of metrics with the right teammates looking out for them. Especially, we're looking for metrics that affect people on either side of you functionally. So if you're on the KFFM in a linear flow, it's easy to see. Or if you're in sales, and you have, let's say you're the sales leader and you have 4 or 5 people geographically working to build your metric, it's great when you look around the metrics and you see somebody's super green and somebody's yellow, because once you connect everybody's behavior to the outcome of the entire function, I think that's the best way to go.
There's a very useful framework, a very simple framework in EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System, which is called simply GWC. And the model there is to own a metric, to be accountable for a metric. You have to get it, as in you understand the mechanics behind it. You need to want it, as in you really want to own that metric. And C, you need to have the capacity to be able to take it on and influence it in the right direction. So GWC, 3 quick questions. Do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity to take it on? And if you can say yes to all of those 3 questions, then you are probably the right person to own that metric.
Great acronym.
Yeah. Talking ownership of metric versus accountability for the metric, are we talking about the same thing or are there nuances?
Same thing for me.
I would say same thing for me too. If you own it, it's yours, and you're accountable in one way, shape, or form, whether you use teammates or have outside help to make sure that if you have accepted accountability for that metric and you own it, that you're going to update it every day. And when it goes, maybe not to green and it's yellow or red, that you have the authority to press the help button and make sure that everybody's aware that something isn't going the way that the company has forecasted.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come across situations where someone's taken on an accountability, so they've taken on ownership for a metric, but they don't have very much ability to influence it. Just because it's a complicated thing and it's we have to pick someone, and there's no one who is really able to influence it over the whole. And in that situation, I say, well, look, you're accountable for it. You own that metric, but your primary role there is to ring the bell when it's not heading in the right direction. Yeah. You've got to ring the bell to the rest of this leadership team or to whoever you think needs to have the bell rung at them, but that is your primary role there. And that works as well, because that's enforcing that peer accountability. We're saying, okay, Bob, this was green yesterday, it's now going amber, and I can see it's going to go red. We need to do something. Well, what do you think about that?
Look, I think that's the example that I used right up front with the CFO. They actually can't go get revenue, which is probably the best way to fix a negative cash position. Besides I'll pay my payables later, or whatever other layers they can collect earlier. However, they can ring the alarm bell to go, whoa, I don't think we have enough leads, or our close rate is too low, our production isn't keeping up with the orders. So I think that your example is excellent. They're accountable to report on it and make sure that when it's going sideways, that people get lots of warning to fix it.
Like, I love what you said there, Damien. I repeated it in my head 15 different times, and there's the authority to push the help button. I love that expression. That's what goes with it. It's like, you own it, therefore it's not just the responsibility, but also the authority that comes with it. Right? We see the imbalance of responsibility and authority all the time in so many different forms, and we're dealing with it. But this is a beautiful example, right? Like, yeah, you are accountable for it being there, but that also gives you the authority to do something when it's not heading where you want it to be.
Let me maybe throw a different situation at you, and I've encountered this a couple of times, and I'm expecting a vigorous debate on this one. So let's see where we go. I have on occasion allowed someone to allow someone else to update their metric for them. Yep. So it's the person who's got easy access to the report, and they'll update the metric on behalf of the person who is accountable. Now, I always push back on that, but if they present a strong argument for that, I'll allow it. But what I will do is in sessions, I deliberately have a very large mouse pointer. So on the screen, I'll put my very large mouse pointer over the number so it can't be seen. And if they don't know it, I tell them they're not in control of that metric and they should start counting it. So they need to know it if they're not putting it in themselves. Thoughts?
I think you're more kind than I am. I would go, they not have somebody else update your metric. simply because I would like to, back in the day when everybody was in the office, I would like to walk down the hall, run into Robert, who owns the metric, and go, "What's your number today?" And I don't want him to say, "Oh, I got to go ask Barb. She updates that for me." Therefore, he does not own the number. Got to
No,
know your number.
yeah, you got to know your number, which is why I test them. Yeah. And if they don't know the number, then it's okay. So it's going back to you. Yeah.
Yep. How's it trending? Where was it yesterday? And,
Yeah.
back to my original question, with the daily huddle, if you have a daily huddle in the morning, and the question is your daily dashboard up to date, including all your metrics and priorities? If they say yes, because somebody else updated their metrics, and then in the meeting I go, "What's your number today?" and they don't know it, they don't own that number.
They don't. No. They've got to know it. Yeah. They've got to know it. Yeah. So I'll allow it if they pass the test, but otherwise, no.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, I had a very, very short engagement, and the reason why it was short was will become very, very clear with a company. And at the kickoff, we were going through the metrics on day 2 for the annuals and the quarterlies, and we identified that he was accountable for revenue. He was a CEO as a SaaS business, and he was also the founder sales guy as well, which is pretty common. And when I sort of explained the implications of owning the revenue metric, and he said, well, I'm not going into Metronome and updating that every day. And I said, well, why not? Why wouldn't you go in? And he said, I'm the CEO. So that was it. We were done.
I have a recent quote, if I'm allowed to say a minor 4-letter word. That guy sounded like king shit on Turd Island.
I actually used this quote earlier today. I had a similar conversation. Actually, it goes all the way back to university. We were talking about business process reengineering, and there was a story that ages me. But the story was an older gentleman used to things the way they were was really uncomfortable with what the company was doing at the time, and I think it was SAP integration or something crazy like that. He was like I'm not going to be doing this every day, am I? And the CEO told him, "Oh, no, you don't have to do it. I can do it for you, but then I don't need you." Right.
I can do it for you, but I don't need you.
So we've talked about accountability mainly in the context of metrics, but it also flows through all sorts of other parts of the business. Damien, do you have a particular way of thinking about that? Beyond the metric side of things.
I do, and I'll bring it back to the circle of accountability. It goes to core values, behaviors. This is how our tribe behaves, and this is what we do. And that circle of accountability, when done well, and you must have a senior leadership team of A players, not just a group of A players, a team of A players. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yep.
Once that is happening, more often, and maybe this has happened to me more than several times now, where the head of the company goes, I just don't need to do anything anymore. Because people inside that circle of accountability are governing outcomes, committed to outcomes. They're governing the behaviors of the team. And every now and again, maybe the visionary has to come in and push the group to a different, longer term strategic outcome, because they do see things. But that circle of accountability can also reel in the head of company when they've gone off on maybe a not so brilliant tangent. And when you get that level playing field and everybody has a hat and the circle can't work without the hat, I suppose no different than, a flywheel. Everybody is a component and they each have functional roles within that. Their first functional role is being a contributing member of the team at the rate that is expected. And so, does accountability have a place outside of metrics? Yes. Inside the circle, you need to connect all the dots. And the minute you feel it, the minute it's not a circle anymore, Maybe you brought in a new piece of the puzzle. The circle was working. We brought in a new piece. You feel it when it's not working. I'm going through a little bit of a situation like that right now where they added a piece and everything was going great. They did need this new piece. They had to break, somebody was wearing two functional hats and it was getting too large. And I don't know how that's going to turn out simply because we have an accepted behavior and probably the five people aren't going to change in order to accommodate the one or not too much because it will, add a new ingredient. It's a new soup. However, it still needs to taste good at the end of the day. It can't have that negative flavor of the new member of the soup is not working out. So I think accountability is first and foremost to be a contributing part of the circle of accountability.
That aligns really nicely with Patrick Lencioni's concept of the first team, and this is a concept I pushed very early on. On the kickoff. I position the first team as every person in that room's team is this team. It's the first. This is the first team, and the functional teams that they are accountable for, that they manage, that they lead day to day, that's their second team. And if people are not comfortable with that view, then they're going to be operating in a silo and they're going to prevent the rest of the leadership team from delivering what they need to. And it's a really, really quick test. If people aren't happy with that concept at the kickoff, I know exactly who won't be there 2 quarters on.
Yeah, I am very much on that page, Jed, and you were alluding to your big mouse to cover the number up. I'll go in 2 or 3 quarters later and somebody will say, yeah, so my team is really working hard on marketing. And I go, oh, are they your first team? And, immediately, oh, yes, are they? And they start to come back to the conversation we had a couple of quarters earlier. Well, first team's in this room.
Yeah.
Always.
Yep. And when you start to see a leader protect their team and be the buffer between the leadership team and the team, then you know that you haven't got a first team member, you've got a second team member in the first team, which doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. That's well said.
I have to admit, I completely blanked out on that concept. I obviously know it. I used it before, but not recently. So thank you for the reminder. I love doing this because I learn, something every time. As we know, and there is a card on it, repetition is good, right? Sometimes you need to hear the things again and again, and I'm sure it will come up 3 times over the next week, as those things usually do. So thank you very much for that reminder. Really appreciate it.
So before we move to wrap up, a big thing for me around accountability is clarity of expectations. And this is somewhere where I find that leadership teams often stumble because they don't really understand the importance of setting clear, super clear expectations, having that clarity before you even start. How do you think that plays into accountability, Damien?
A couple of ways to address that. First, as a priority, like if you were running a priority, I think making sure that it's well written and everybody understands exactly the outcome that you're after, how much time it will take. So the finish line, how much time it will take to get there, and who is accountable first, and then who is going to be responsible. Then the second point, and I keep saying circle of accountability, that is cultural. And the CEO has to lead that culture by being rigorous, not ruthless. So it's very acceptable to go, you didn't finish your work on time. And that's not ambiguous. You didn't finish your work on time. We finish our work on time here. So the next time you either ask for help before it's too late or you don't take on so much. Those sorts of statements start to create a cultural norm. I want the rest of the circle in the room to start saying what the CEO said, not only to each other, but to their functional teams as well, so that it becomes a cultural norm in the whole company. I still have my original company that I started when I was 28 years old. It is a pub. I have not worked there in at least 22 years. And I promise you, this was a bit of a fluke because I was a young man, that if I walk in the door, I know everybody there, but I've never seen them before and I don't know their names. I just know why they're there, and they have a familiarization to them that the culture has endured over, I think we're up to 33 years now. And the gatekeepers have been always the people that were working there. And I think that's what any great CEO is trying to get within their senior leadership team, so that it trickles out into other circles within the organization.
Yeah. I've been to that pub, I think, and I'd agree with that. Yeah, you walk in and everyone behaves in exactly the same way.
Yeah, I don't even know their names. Normally I can mystery shop them.
Undercover boss. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
do that. Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we're coming to an end, but I would love to double click on something Jed just said, and that's the concept of the accountability for culture, right? Because we were talking about metric clear, we were talking about objectives, priorities. That's it, for your function in it. But how about the accountability for the values, for the behavior in the organization, for the culture? You just talked about it, but can we dive into that a little bit deeper? How does it look like? How does it present itself? And how does that, what happens when it fails?
Well,
For
I
me,
think
that
that
is
goes,
clearly the accountability of the CEO. That's the CEO's accountability. There is no question. Now, they are accountable for culture, they're accountable for setting and leading the strategy, and they're accountable for holding the leadership team to account. And if they're doing anything else, they're doing someone else's job. Over to you, Damien.
I love that I let you go first because that was excellent. Um, Much like a priority, we can't just say, here's the behavior, mimic me. We have to have clearly defined core values, that these are the 3 to maybe 4 things that we aspire to be. They must be written well with specific examples of what it looks like when you're doing that. Much like a priority is very well written, we need to write it out so that when we're doing reviews, hopefully on a quarterly basis, we can say, look at you living the core values, and here are all the examples I will give you in your own behavior where you're living the core values. So we're reinforcing positive behavior to the point where we only have 24 hours in the day. And if all the behavior is positive behavior, we don't have any time for negative behavior. So everybody wants to turn the negative behavior off. I don't want to. I just want to turn the positive behavior up.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. If all we do is positive behavior, we don't have any time for negative behavior. That is gold.
Yeah.
And you can use it.
In
You can use it for your wives.
So that reminded me, Damien, about a musical that you saw not so long ago that you really liked, right? So we put all that negative behavior in a box and crush it.
Look, I really believe, like, so as you know, I feel strongly that I have a lot of negative behaviors. If I would just do way more of my positive ones, I would have no time for my negative ones. Just crush that other guy.
Love that, like the solving by displacement. It makes
Yeah.
total sense, actually. And you have a lot of that in psychology, right? Including the fake it till you make it principle, right? It's like build those habits of doing what you want to be doing. So literally, there is no room for the rest of it. Again, never thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
And if you're the head of company, um, we don't have any time not to reward positive behavior. The minute that it happens, that's that core value. Good for you. You're amazing. Don't wait for,
Yeah.
13 weeks or 6 months or a year for a review to tell them they're behaving well. In the moment. I always say it's like a bunch of 5-year-old hockey players. You would never do this to a group of 5-year-old hockey players. They'd come in into the dressing room and go, how do we do, coach? And you'd go, I'll tell you at the end of the season. Now get back out there and play. You just wouldn't do that. Yet we do it to adults all the time.
Yeah.
So it's the CEO, Jed. Head of companies, got to run it.
Yeah. And it's not something that can be delegated to the head of people and culture. Yeah. They might do the
No.
execution, but it's got to be led and directed from the front, from the top.
We should have a vote right now that we change HOC acronym away from head of company to head of culture.
Well, the acronym would be the same, Damien. That wouldn't work.
I know.
All
And
right.
that is probably a really good place to bring it to an end.
I think so. Yeah, we covered so much, accountability from so many different angles. Damien, thank you so very much to joining us. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything you've done for me over the years. So thank you, Jet, for today as well. And yeah, we'll see you next time and see where this takes us. What will be the next card we'll pull out.